I divorced my cheating husband. After the divorce, I got the house, the car, and custody of the child. Oh, and also his mistress. Yes, she's mine too. When my ex-husband was on the verge of exploding, I smiled and said, "Don't lose your cool just yet. This is only the beginning." #1 My husband cheated on me. He claimed he had fallen in love with a young woman named Rachel. When we walked out of the courthouse after finalizing the divorce, he couldn't contain his excitement. He waved the divorce certificate at Rachel, who was waiting outside, and rushed toward her, ready to embrace his new beginning. Rachel smiled and spread her arms wide, but instead of hugging him, she bypassed him entirely and hugged me. My husband, or rather, my ex-husband, was stunned, his face turning green on the spot. I bet his brain was overheating, desperately trying to process what was happening. But honestly, I couldn't blame him. After all, Derek and I had been college sweethearts. We dated for 6 years before getting married, and everything seemed so natural. Even after we got married, our relationship seemed stable. We didn't even argue much. To everyone else, we were the perfect couple. I was busy with work most of the time, so I never paid much attention to Derek's private affairs. In his eyes, I was just a sweet, naive woman. He would never, in a million years, imagine that Rachel and I had joined forces against him. I could tell he was struggling to make sense of it all. "Emily," he asked, "have you known about my affair all along?" Of course I had. What, did he think my intuition was just for decoration? But to be fair, I wouldn't have uncovered his infidelity without some help from his wonderful mother, Karen. It all started when Karen, as usual, began pestering me about having a second child. But this time she said something that stuck with me. "You need to give Derek a son to carry on the family name, and if you won't, there are plenty of women who will." Now, Karen had always been pushy about us having another child, but she had never sounded so arrogant and smug before, and the way she confidently mentioned other women lining up to have Derek's child, that was new. There's no smoke without fire. That comment planted a seed of suspicion in my mind. Suddenly, all the seemingly perfect aspects of our life together started to look like a flimsy illusion. Derek had been unusually busy lately. He was working late more often, and it sometimes took him hours to respond to my texts. Looking back, it was probably because I never doubted him that he didn't bother to cover his tracks. Confirming his affair turned out to be even easier than I expected. It only took 2 days for my best friend Sophie to dig up information on this Rachel girl. Sophie discovered that Rachel was fresh out of college, beautiful, kind, and charming. She and Derek had met at a business event. From what Sophie could tell, Rachel seemed like a decent, straightforward person. When Sophie pretended to bump into her and started chatting, subtly steering the conversation toward the topic of mistresses, Rachel became visibly upset and even lashed out at the idea. Sophie's conclusion. Her reaction was genuine. She doesn't seem like the type who'd willingly become someone's mistress. Apparently, during their conversation, Rachel described her boyfriend as a mature, single, and reserved man, a perfect gentleman. So it was clear, Rachel had been duped. She wasn't the mistress, she was the victim of Derek's lies. #2. I figured confronting Derek would be much easier with Rachel on my side, so I decided to meet her. As expected, Derek had presented himself to Rachel as a successful and eligible bachelor. When Rachel found out he was married and had been lying to her the whole time, her fury was palpable. She slammed her hands on the table, practically shaking with anger. "Derek, I'm going to destroy him." I calmly looked at her trembling hands. Beating him up or yelling at him might make you feel better for a moment. But don't you want to do something even more satisfying? Rachel nodded eagerly. At that moment, we were perfectly united in our cause, and so our plan began. Step 1. Rachel started accidentally revealing her wealthy heiress persona to Derek. I borrowed every luxury item I could from Sophie, designer handbags, jewelry, you name it, and Rachel made sure Derek saw them all. We even rented an expensive sports car for her to drive around in. Rachel casually hinted to Derek that if they got married, her parents would shower them with lavish gifts, real estate, cars, and a ridiculously generous dowry. Over those few days, I could practically see Derek's mood soaring. He was clearly thrilled, already imagining his dream life. To be continued. Well, of course. After all, in his eyes, having a young, beautiful, and wealthy girl completely devoted to him must have felt like hitting the jackpot. But now, sitting with us in the cafe, Derek finally uncovered the truth. "You two teamed up to play me?" I rolled my eyes. Oh, listen to yourself. If you hadn't acted like a jerk first, how would we even get the chance to mess with you? Derek glared angrily at Rachel. "So, all those things you said before were lies? Rachel, you knew all about my situation, yet you still pretended to be some rich heiress in front of me?" Calmly, I took a sip of my coffee. "Derek, after all these years, you really have grown wrinkles but not brains. If she hadn't done that, would you have agreed to leave with nothing so easily?" I'll admit, looking back now, my track record in relationships has been pretty dismal. But when it comes to my career, things have always gone smoothly. And Derek, despite being kind of a scumbag, does have some professional skills. Otherwise, he wouldn't have caught the attention of a young girl like Rachel. Over the years since college, we'd managed to save up quite a bit: 1 house, 2 cars, and a 7-figure savings account. By any measure, that's no small amount. If it weren't for the fact that he saw Rachel's seemingly wealthy family as a golden ticket to a secure future, we probably wouldn't have made it to divorce. There's no way he would have walked away without a fight. Leaving with nothing, not a single cent to his name. If I were Derek, I'd want to slam my head against the wall too. But the worst part isn't even that. After all, money, cars, houses, these material things can be earned back with effort in the future. The most devastating blow lies with the child. Derek knows deep down that his image as a father has completely crumbled in Lucy's eyes. Not long ago, on a weekend, I took Lucy out for some fun and happened to run into Rachel and Derek. My first instinct was to avoid them. But Lucy, with her sharp little eyes, spotted him from afar and started shouting, "Daddy! Daddy!" at the top of her lungs. At that moment, Derek was lovingly feeding Rachel, his arm wrapped around her. Lucy, now in elementary school, loves to gossip with her classmates. So, naturally, she understood what it meant for her dad to be holding hands with a young woman. That day, though, it wasn't Derek who was the most nervous. It was Rachel and me. But since everything was out in the open, there was no use avoiding it. That night, I dropped Lucy off at Sophie's house, and then went home. I confronted Derek with tears and rage. After a whole night of drama, I was so exhausted I just collapsed into bed and fell asleep. Derek, after being hit, yelled at, and thrown out, had no choice but to figure out how to keep Rachel happy. In contrast to my fiery outburst, Rachel acted all sweet, understanding, and nurturing that day. She carefully tended to Derek's bruises and reassured him that she forgave him for the sake of love. Honestly, based on Rachel's account of what happened, I can see why Derek would have been completely smitten. Sure enough, after that day, Derek became even bolder. He didn't even bother hiding it from me anymore and just stopped coming home altogether. Later, I didn't keep Derek's affair a secret from Lucy either. I don't believe in sheltering her like some fragile flower. As a girl, she needs to understand the harsh realities of the world and the deceitful nature of some men. These are lessons I'll teach her from a young age. But it seems Derek, like his mother Karen with her obsession over having a son, never truly saw Lucy as his one and only treasure. Even now, he still asked Rachel, "Weren't you pregnant with our son? Promise me you'll have our son, and I'll give you anything you want. This obsession with having a son, it's something Derek definitely inherited from Karen. Rachel, smiling smugly, pulled a document out of her bag. Derek, you're so unbelievably stupid. Did you seriously think I was pregnant? Back then, Rachel had lied about being pregnant purely to push Derek into divorcing me. It had been a bluff, a spur-of-the-moment decision that spiraled out of control. Once you start lying, though, it gets harder and harder to come clean. So Rachel just kept going with it. Maybe that's why Derek later seemed so indifferent when it came to fighting for custody of Lucy, but honestly, he had it coming. When Derek grabbed the test report from Rachel's hand, his eyes turned red. Whether from sadness or anger, I couldn't tell. Rachel, how could you do this to me? Rachel rolled her eyes. Oh, come on. Why wouldn't I? Don't forget, Derek, our entire relationship started with a lie in the first place. Derek stood up, his hand reaching for the coffee cup in front of him, clearly intending to throw it at Rachel. Luckily, I was quick enough to grab it from him and, without hesitation, splashed it right back at him. Oh, what a satisfying moment. The other patrons in the cafe started turning their heads toward us. I cleared my throat and raised my voice. What's the matter? You cheat, and now you think you're entitled to act out? Hearing this, the people around us began whispering, their eyes darting toward Derek. A few young women at a nearby table even stood up, clearly ready to step in if Derek dared to make a move. Derek, still clinging to some shred of dignity, realized the scene he was causing. He got up, ready to walk away. I shot to my feet. Derek, don't rush off just yet. We're only getting started. What's the matter? Can't handle it already? Derek turned back, his face contorted in frustration. You're insane. You and Rachel, the both of you, are absolutely insane. I laughed. Insane? Derek, don't you think it's suspicious that the two of us are here together? You should know why, shouldn't you? Still defiant, Derek retorted. Emily, if it weren't for you refusing to have a second child, do you think I'd have cheated? Oh, look at him trying to shift the blame. Honestly, if Derek doesn't consider a career in selling excuses, the world is truly missing out. But since he brought up the subject of a second child, it was time to reveal a little secret. I reached into my bag and pulled out another medical report. In bold black letters, the diagnosis of Derek's infertility was crystal clear. To make sure he didn't miss it, I pointed directly at the words with my finger. The truth is, I love children. After Lucy had grown a bit, I had started considering the possibility of having another, but despite our efforts, nothing ever happened. Left with no choice, I suggested a checkup for both of us to see if there was any medical issue. Derek was busy at the time, so I went to pick up the results myself. When he asked about them, I simply told him everything was fine. The reality, though, was that I hid his report to spare his pride. So it's painfully obvious. Aside from Lucy, Derek would never have another child. And the image of a perfect father he tried so hard to maintain in front of Lucy completely shattered. Derek stared at me in disbelief. That's impossible. You don't have to believe me. The hospital is just around the corner. Feel free to check for yourself. I don't know if it was the shock or something else, but Derek looked dazed, like he was struggling to process everything. But this wasn't over. Still, the rest of the fallout was something Derek would have to deal with on his own. I grabbed Rachel, and we left the cafe. As we drove away, I glanced back through the car window at Derek, who had slumped into a seat by the cafe window, looking utterly defeated. Rachel, do you think I was too harsh? I asked. Rachel tightened her seatbelt with a sharp tug. A woman who isn't ruthless is bound to lose her footing. Exactly. Pitying men only leads to a lifetime of regret. The next day, I took some time off work to relax. Just as I was waking up, Sophie sent me a message. Derek's boss called him in for a talk today. I stood on the balcony for a while, letting the cool morning breeze clear my head. Sophie had already done some digging for me. Turns out, Derek's boss at the headquarters, a woman known for her zero tolerance toward dishonesty, had a particular disdain for infidelity. So, when I sent her an email detailing all of Derek's indiscretions, I knew this day would come. Divorcing Derek and taking everything from him wasn't enough for me. I wanted him ruined. I wanted him to lose everything he had worked for. I wanted him to wake up in the dead of night, haunted by regret for the rest of his life. And I wanted every man who even thought about cheating to tremble at the cost. Only then could I feel like I had truly done justice to the time and effort I had wasted on him. Just as I was savoring the aftermath of Derek's professional downfall, there was a knock at my door. It was Karen, of course. In my focus on dealing with Derek, I had forgotten about his meddling mother. Karen marched into my living room and plopped herself down on the couch. "Emily, let's not beat around the bush. This house belongs to my son. Why do you get to keep it after the divorce?" I raised an eyebrow. "You're well aware of your son's affair, aren't you? After all, when Rachel first told Derek she was pregnant, Karen was practically scrambling to take care of Rachel's post-birth recovery. Karen didn't even flinch. "Oh, come on, Emily. Don't be so petty. Men fool around sometimes. It's not a big deal." "Oh, really?" Funny coming from the same woman who once threatened to hang herself when Derek's father so much as danced with another woman at the community center. Well, I didn't feel like wasting too much energy talking to someone like her. I calmly took out the divorce agreement and explained to her, word by word, that Derek and I were already divorced. Derek himself had signed the agreement to leave the marriage with nothing. "Emily, if you hadn't tricked my son, would he have walked away with nothing?" I rubbed my forehead, finding her claim utterly ridiculous. It was the first time I'd heard someone argue a case for the abuser. "Let me make this clear. It was your son who cheated first. He was the one desperate to marry someone else and insisted on divorcing me, even volunteering to leave with nothing." When I brought up how Derek had forced me into the divorce, a flicker of guilt finally showed on Karen's face. But just a moment later, she reverted to her unreasonable demeanor. "I don't care. I don't agree." She didn't agree? What right or qualification did she have to say that? When Derek and I got married, his parents didn't contribute a cent. Everything we owned was the result of years of hard work after we graduated. And now, with a little savings built up, she had the nerve to stand here and declare her disapproval. I didn't bother arguing with someone so unreasonable. I simply opened the front door and said, "If you disagree, feel free to take a cab to the courthouse, but for now, please leave my home." Karen plopped herself down on my couch, clearly ready to dig in for a long fight. I picked up my phone from the couch, opened the dial pad, and entered 911 right in front of her. Then I politely reminded her, "Entering someone's home without permission? That's trespassing and illegal, just so you know." Realizing I was serious this time, Karen reluctantly left. 5 minutes later, I spotted her through my large floor-to-ceiling window, chatting away with some neighbors on one of the benches in the neighborhood. Another 5 minutes passed, and I received a friendly message from a neighbor letting me know what Karen was up to. Turns out, the reason she was loitering around was to spread rumors about me, claiming I was cruel and heartless, forcing her son to walk away penniless. I hesitated for a moment before calling Sophie. I explained the situation to her and asked if she could pick up Lucy from school for me today. While I didn't necessarily shy away from such confrontations in front of Lucy, having her around would inevitably limit how far I could go. After tidying up a bit, I prepared to head downstairs for a showdown. Just as I finished getting dressed, I received a message from Rachel. "Sis, I'll be on the battlefield in 10 minutes. It seemed Sophie had filled Rachel in on the situation. Rachel, being the spirited young woman she was, always brought a certain energy to these kinds of situations. 10 minutes later, Rachel texted me again, telling me to come downstairs and enjoy the show. When I got downstairs, Rachel wasted no time. In front of all the gossiping neighbors, she dramatically threw herself at me, almost as if she were about to kneel. "Miss Emily, I'm so sorry. I'm truly, truly sorry." I was utterly confused. Rachel hadn't given me a heads up about this performance. What was she up to? Before I could react, Rachel turned and lunged toward Karen. "You, finally I found you," she cried, ready to pounce on her. Thankfully, the neighbors played along and quickly stepped in to restrain Rachel. Held back by the crowd, Rachel burst into tears, sobbing uncontrollably. At that moment, I finally understood how she had managed to intimidate Derek into leaving our marriage with nothing. Her acting skills were absolutely top-notch. Through her tears, Rachel leaned on an older woman in the crowd and wailed, "Derek!" Her son. He had a wife and child at home, but he pretended to be single, swindling money and love from others. Because of him, I was branded as a homewrecker. The more Rachel cried, the more intense her sobs became. The neighbors, who had been listening to Karen's gossip just moments earlier, gradually started to piece things together. Before long, they began inching away from Karen, whispering criticisms about her behavior. With this scene playing out, I doubted Karen would dare to cause trouble in our neighborhood again, but Rachel wasn't done. "This isn't enough," she said. As she said that, I had just finished organizing the legal documents and sent them off to my lawyer. "Of course, it's not enough," I replied. "The small house Derek's parents are living in right now? I bought that with my own money before we got married. Back when Derek and I had just settled in the city, his mother insisted on moving in with his father to live with us. They pestered me until I had no choice but to let them stay in the little house my parents had helped me buy right after college. But now, given everything that had happened, there was no way I was letting them keep that house." Rachel nodded. "All right. When you go to reclaim the house, if they try to pull anything, call me. I don't mind putting on another performance like the one today." I smiled and nodded back. I invited Rachel to stay for tea at my place. As she was about to leave, she suddenly paused and, with her back to me, said, "Emily, I'm sorry." It was the first time she'd ever apologized to me so sincerely since we met. To be honest, I did harbor some resentment toward her at first. But after thinking it through, what fault did Rachel really have? In this whole ordeal, she was just as much a victim as I was. And honestly, with Derek's sleazy character, even if it hadn't been Rachel, there would have eventually been a Lisa or a Sarah. As Rachel was heading out the door, I stopped her. I took the most beautiful flower from the vase and handed it to her. "Rachel, flowers bloom. They are never at fault. The only ones at fault are those who cruelly pluck them." I noticed her eyes were red as she left. She's still young, with so much of her life ahead of her. There's no need for her to be stuck in this dirty mess. I hope this time she'll truly let it go. But as for Derek's family, it's clear they won't be letting this go anytime soon. After the court clarified the ownership of his parents' house, they were urged to move out. Adding to that, Rachel occasionally showed up at their place, causing a scene more than once. Derek's parents, who still had some semblance of shame, couldn't bear the neighbors' gossip anymore and finally decided to move back to their hometown. I heard that on their way back, after a heavy rain in the mountains, the roads were slippery, and Karen fell and broke her leg. Sophie was the one who got this news for me and couldn't help but say with a triumphant tone, "See? Karma, isn't it?" When Lucy was little, both Derek and I were extremely busy with work. Back then, we thought about hiring a nanny to look after her. But Karen, being stingy with the monthly nanny fees, insisted on taking care of Lucy herself. She never liked girls, though, and naturally was inattentive while watching Lucy. One time, while taking Lucy out, she got engrossed in a line dancing session and left Lucy by the roadside. Lucy ended up falling out of her stroller, breaking her arm and needing weeks to recover. Thinking about it now, I guess Karen really got what was coming to her. As for Derek, he stayed in the same city. After all, he went to college and started his career here. 10 years is a long time to just let go of everything. But he should never have messed with Lucy. When I went to pick up Lucy from school as usual, her teacher casually mentioned that Lucy had been picked up by her dad. My heart sank instantly. Looking up, I saw Lucy struggling and crying in Derek's arms. When I reached them, Lucy saw me and immediately burst into tears, calling Mommy over and over. At that moment, I wanted nothing more than to strangle Derek. Later, Lucy told me that Derek had promised to take her to see me, which was why she'd gone with him. That day, Derek clung to me and Lucy, going on and on with his repetitive, insincere apologies. He kept asking for another chance, hoping we could forgive him. Annoyed, I pushed him away. Derek, let me tell you one last time, there is no way I will ever forgive you. Lucy, standing beside me, tugged at my hand and echoed, word by word. Dad, you already have a new family. Please don't come looking for me anymore. At that moment, the only phrase that came to mind as I looked at Derek was a beaten dog. For the next few days, Derek did seem to quiet down. Sophie told me he'd been busy looking for a job recently. After all, leaving the marriage with nothing, he needed to work to support himself and his troublesome parents. But given his history of being fired by major companies, plus Sophie's connections in the city, restarting his career was proving to be no easy task. I figured Derek wouldn't last much longer. Sure enough, 3 days after Lucy stayed at Sophie's place, Derek showed up at my door. Seeing his utterly defeated face, I let out a long breath. The day I had been waiting for had finally arrived. The vibrant energy Derek once had was long gone. The moment he opened his mouth, his tone was full of bitterness. Emily, we were husband and wife once. Did you really have to go this far? Go this far? When he cheated, did he ever think, as a husband, not to go that far? When he decided to abandon Lucy, did he ever think, as a father, not to go that far? Especially when he raised his hand against me. I took a small bottle of vitamin C tablets from the drawer and threw it at his feet. Derek, whatever I've done, could it ever match what you did? The moment Derek saw the bottle, his face went pale. To be honest, if Derek's only sin had been cheating, maybe, just maybe, if he'd begged me, I might have considered letting him leave with just the clothes on his back. I wouldn't have pushed him this far. After all these years, we might as well part ways amicably, given everything we've been through. But no, it wasn't just an affair. I've looked into it. The vitamins in this bottle have been swapped out with psychotropic drugs. Prolonged use can easily lead to a mental breakdown. Derek's eyes darted nervously as I finished speaking. Emily, so you've known all along? Of course I'm no fool. Derek, we've been together for 12 years now, haven't we? I can't believe it. Not only did I fail to truly understand you, but I also underestimated how cruel you could be. From the very beginning, he never intended to let me walk away from this marriage unscathed. At first, he didn't know that Rachel had fabricated his identity as a trust fund kid. He hadn't yet received her promised financial support. He hadn't realized he wouldn't have any more children, nor did he know whether I'd decisively choose to divorce him. He must have had doubts about me, at least at some point. To say the least, he never really planned to let me leave this failed marriage unscathed. I stepped closer to him. Derek, rest assured, I'll hand this bottle over to the police. Soon enough, you'll have plenty of time in prison to reflect on your miserable life. As I said this, Derek's gaze locked on mine, his eyes betraying a flicker of distress. He lunged forward to snatch the bottle from my hand. I dodged, seething with anger. Derek, even now you show no remorse? His eyes burned with rage. You're right, Emily. I do regret it, But I don't regret drugging you. I regret not poisoning you to death in the first place. Derek, you're beyond saving. It's almost ironic. When we first met, he treated me with such care and tenderness. Now he's trying to destroy me. As he lunged for the bottle again, he pushed me onto the couch. The difference in strength between us was glaring. Pinned beneath him, I couldn't move an inch. His eyes, now bloodshot, fixated on the bottle I clutched tightly in my hand. In that moment, he was like an uncontrollable beast. He yanked my hair violently, pinning me against the couch. When his eyes landed on the necklace around my neck, his pupils seemed to dilate. Then, his hands clamped around my throat. I felt the air leaving my lungs. And just as I thought I wouldn't be able to breathe any longer, my front door was flung open. The police stormed in and took Derek away. I was escorted to the station to give my statement. What Derek didn't know was that ever since he moved out, I had installed new cameras in the living room. I laid out the entire story, leaving nothing out or exaggerated. With the video evidence and my testimony, Derek was already doomed. The police told me that after his arrest, Derek kept muttering apologies and begged for my forgiveness. I examined my nails and replied calmly, "Forgive him? Never. On the contrary, I'll hire the best lawyer in New York to press charges." When I left the police station, Sophie was waiting for me outside. Her eyes were red. "You scared me to death. What if we'd arrived a moment later? I can't even imagine what could have happened." I glanced back at the station and touched the necklace around my neck. It wouldn't have come to that. Just 3 words, but Sophie seemed to understand exactly what I meant. The truth is, every step Derek took that day had been calculated by me. Even his wild outburst when he saw the necklace around my neck, it was all part of my plan. That necklace had been custom-made, its pendant shaped like a pair of handcuffs. In that moment, Derek must have subconsciously thought of prison. Fear would have gripped him. In that extreme state of fear, coupled with the recent chain of blows to his fragile psyche, his erratic behavior was entirely predictable. Attempted murder. This time, Derek was well and truly finished. I kept my promise and hired the best lawyer in New York to take on the case. I spared no expense, and the outcome was exactly what I wanted. After everything had finally settled, I stepped out of the courthouse. The rain had just stopped, and a long-lost rainbow stretched across the sky. Rachel and Sophie were waiting for me outside. I heard that Rachel had bought a ticket to Seattle. After today, she would leave the city and likely never return. As for me, I sold the old house and planned to move to a new city with Lucy to start fresh. Before leaving the courthouse, my lawyer called out to me, "Emily, if I remember correctly, your major in college was chemistry, but your secondary major was psychology, right?" I nodded. However, I added, "I didn't actually complete my secondary major." My lawyer chuckled. "Fair enough. Otherwise, you'd probably be even more impressive." Still, everything had settled. For me, this was already the best outcome. End.